Hey everyone, let's jump right into today's explainer. We're looking at a massive economic phenomenon that pretty much affects anyone living in or visiting a major historic city today. We're going to explore the hidden mechanics of a booming industry that is fundamentally shaping local economies. And we're starting with Italy as our prime case study. Take a look at this number. In 2024, Italy hit an absolute record of 139.6 million tourist arrivals. On paper, that sounds like a massive economic win, right? More foot traffic means more money. But when you really peel back the layers of this data, the picture gets way more complicated and, honestly, super fascinating. To get to the bottom of this, we're going to run through 6 key areas in this explainer. First, the tourism paradox. Then, GDP versus labor productivity. Third, why wages remain low. 4, we'll do a quick comparison with Spain and Switzerland. 5, the impact of the 2026 Olympics. And finally, rethinking the tourism model. All right, starting with section 1, the tourism paradox. We naturally tend to assume that having millions of visitors guarantees prosperity, right? I mean, it's the whole reason post-World War II Italy prioritized rebuilding hotels and really incentivized tourists to flock to its historic centers. But the reality on the ground today tells a totally different story about who actually gets that wealth. And nothing illustrates this paradox quite like Venice. Check out these numbers because they are wild. The population completely plummeted from 150,000 back in 1951 to just around 50,000 today. And why? Well, a third of the center's buildings are now short-term rentals. That's driven rents up by nearly 50% in just 7 years. So the very industry that was supposed to enrich the city has literally forced out its own residents, its totally inflated housing costs, and swapped out authentic artisan shops for cheap souvenir stalls for people who honestly only stay a few hours anyway. Moving on to section 2, GDP versus labor productivity. Take a look at this crazy imbalance. We've got a massive 14.4% of Italy's entire national workforce dedicated to tourism. We're talking over 4 million jobs, yet it produces a disproportionately tiny slice of direct GDP, just 5%. Even if you loop in the indirect supply chains, it still only hits about 9.6%. So how on earth can so many people produce relatively so little wealth? Well, it all comes down to understanding labor productivity. This is literally the engine of wealth generation for any modern economy. You know, in most industries, you introduce some new tech, and suddenly one worker can pump out 5, 10, or even 100 times more output. But tourism is completely different. It suffers from what we can call the waiter paradox. Unlike making cars or writing software, a waiter can only carry so many plates at one time, right? A hotel cleaner can only clean a room so fast. Aside from maybe sending a digital ticket to the kitchen, the tourism sector just can't hack its way to exponentially higher output using technology. Physical limitations are physical limitations. And as a direct result of hitting that technological ceiling, the average labor productivity in the tourism sector is a staggering 30% lower than the national average. When an entire economy shifts heavily toward a low productivity sector like this, it inherently kneecaps its ability to grow real, lasting wealth. Which brings us to section 3, why wages remain low. Let's look at the devastating contradiction playing out right now. Because as we know, productivity dictates pay. That's why the average income in the tourism sector sits at just 17,000 euros, compared to the national average of 32,000 euros. But really look at that bottom stat. Over the last decade, tourism employment absolutely boomed by 54%, yet real wages in the sector actually fell by 8.7%. So you've got this massive wave of workers pouring into an industry where their actual purchasing power is just actively shrinking. It's a tough spot to be in. Let's zoom out a bit for section 4, the comparison, Spain and Switzerland. Notice the stark contrasts in these numbers here. Highly productive, wealthy economies like Switzerland keep a very low reliance on tourism, sitting way down at just 2% of their GDP. Italy is currently hovering in the middle at 5%. But then look at Spain. They have fully doubled down on the tourism economy, relying on it for a massive 12.3% of their GDP. And honestly, Spain is showing us the extreme end of this model. In places like Barcelona, the friction between low local wages and sky-high tourist-driven living costs has completely reached a boiling point. Locals are so priced out, they've literally resorted to firing water guns at tourists in the streets. It got so intense that the local government was forced to announce a radical, total ban on all short-term rentals by 2029. It's a glaring warning of what happens when the economic scales tip way too far. That leads us right into Section 5, the impact of the 2026 Olympics. So, let's see how this is going to build over the next few years. Italy is gearing up to host some massive global events: the Catholic Jubilee in 2025 and the Milan Cortina Winter Olympics in 2026. These act as huge economic multipliers. Because of these events, estimates suggest the tourism sector's weight is going to skyrocket, projecting it'll consume 12.6% of the national GDP and nearly 16% of the total workforce by 2034. Essentially, that's moving Italy right into that extreme Spanish model we just talked about. And this brings us to a super critical realization. These impending mega events force us to confront a really hard economic truth. If you double down on expanding a low productivity sector, you risk structurally accelerating the decline of your average national purchasing power. Sure, you might be creating more jobs on paper, but they are increasingly poorer jobs. Which means we need to talk about Section 6, rethinking the tourism model. We absolutely have to shift away from this hit-and-run model. Right now, 70% of visitors to places like Venice are hit and run, meaning they stay for just a few hours, spend very little, and just strain the local infrastructure. Instead, experts are suggesting a pivot to high-value alternatives. Luxury tourism, for example, makes up just a fraction of the visitors, but generates 10 times more spending, and they actively seek out authentic local traditions. Then there's roots tourism, which is descendants of immigrants returning to explore their heritage. They bring a really deep respect for local communities. And there is massive potential here, guys. The number of roots tourism travelers almost doubled from 5.8 million back in 1997 to 10 million in 2018. This totally proves that there is a huge, eager market out there for quality over sheer quantity. So, as we face down yet another year of record-breaking arrivals all across the globe, the ultimate question remains. The data clearly shows that unchecked tourism growth hollows out local wealth. Will economies choose to strategically protect their future and their local communities, or will they just let the resource curse run its course until their historic cities are nothing more than beautiful, empty shells? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. I really hope it gave you a powerful new lens to look through the next time you visit a historic city.